Hi guys, Romans here, and in this video I'm going to tell you about how I wrote the music for Lonely Crossings. I wrote it back in 2012, which makes it actually older than most of the stuff on the first album. The only two songs that are older than Lonely Crossings are We're Building Our Monument and Living in Fear. And I wrote the music when I was in Los Angeles in California, so technically this makes the only song I have written so far outside of my home country. The original song, just like Wrong Doors, for example, had a different lyrics. It went through a complete rewrite for the sake of the second album, and the original version was called Lonely Sunsets, so at least half of the title is the same. And I'm gonna talk about the lyrics in the next video. I recorded the first demo of this track in 2014. I'm gonna use it in this video because that version really shows how the song sounded when I wrote it originally. There's an acoustic guitar, bass, and some drums. It was recorded in my room with a friend of mine, so pretty authentic as to how I wrote it. In terms of the music, not much has changed since the original version. There are only subtle changes which I'm gonna touch upon a little later on in the video. Also, this makes for a pretty unique song within the IAKO BEI discography because it's like this texture-driven indie pop mixed with shoegaze and some pop rock and 80s influenced electronic synth sounds and gospel vocals in the chorus. So this makes for a pretty different track, especially like the shoegaze territory. I don't really even listen to shoegaze. Before we start with the actual song, just listen to how the main theme of the track sounded originally in the 2014 demo, reflecting how I wrote that theme on the guitar and how it sounds on synths in the album version right now. Okay, so there are a couple of tips and tricks and interesting stories to tell about the song, how it came to be, the arrangements and so on. So let's start right away. How much changing the words changes the melody? What I mean by that, as I've already mentioned, Lonely Sunsets was the original title of the song, so it had different lyrics, and it went like this. I face this lonely, and from that we went to my passion has become a burden. So especially the beginning, my passion, from one syllable to three syllables, which is kind of a big difference. And when I was recording this track at home and I was doing the pre-production demo, I started layering the backing vocals and creating this gospel choir in the chorus. And obviously when you finish with all of the backing vocals, you listen to it and I could hear something was off. So logically what you do is you go backing vocal by backing vocal, trying to identify which one is the pitchy one. And the funny thing was that all of the backing vocals were all right. So it was the main melody that just wasn't right. So intuitively, I changed it to my passion has become. So not just singing that F note, but going from F sharp to F. And suddenly it clicked and the whole choir started sounding really great. Now you can hear the choir with just flat F, and then you can hear the melody that was actually used in the final song. My passion, my passion. So an interesting thing about it is that when you change the lyrics to the point where you have different syllables at certain moments, it may actually end up being almost like a different song with a different melody. When I face these lonely sunsets all alone, my passion has become a burden. I've got no one to share. Have you ever had an idea that seemed too simple? Now, a really good example of that is the mid section in my latest single Lonely Crossings that comes after the second chorus. The chord progression here is as basic as it can get. like High Hopes from Pink Floyd, a very overused chord progression. And here comes one of the differences between the original version. When this section came in, basically it was just this chord progression for almost a minute, and then we went back to the main theme of the track, and that was supposed to be for the potential guitar solo. Now in the album version we don't go back to the theme, and even that whole section, a partner in crime, with all those backing vocals, was a new addition that wasn't in the original version. So when you have this chord progression going on for almost like 2 minutes, I think it's like 1 minute and 40 seconds actually, with only one variation, which is, if we had just all of the instruments playing the chord progression over and over again, it would be very repetitive and very, just like I mentioned at the beginning, very simple. So when you have a simple idea, which in this case is this simple repetitive chord progression, sometimes it's not about playing it in a more complex way or adding more notes to it or changing it every now and then, you know, modulating from key to key, but it's about taking their chord progression and making it interesting sonically. I think that the sound is just so important when you make music. So in this track, basically you have this sense of like a lot of stuff happening, whereas the chord progression remains the same. Many times when you have a simple idea, it's not about making the idea more complex, it's about making the execution more interesting.
There she stands, looking at the sky, believing. Is it only gonna get harder with time?
Do you like it when not all of the choruses in the song are the same? This is an interesting arranging technique that is not used very often. You have chorus, for example, 3 times in the track, and every time the chorus is a bit different. I kind of did that on the first album. Usually it was the last chorus that had some additional thing or some change arrangement wise. Sometimes it was a different lyric. Probably the best example on the first album is Missing Colors, where really every chorus is different. And even Cortex, where all 4 choruses are super different, but you know, Cortex is like 15 minutes long, so it's not a conventional track. And in Lonely Crossings, I really decided to kind of go for that. I think that the chorus in itself is pretty original, because when the song starts, you kind of have this feeling like it's a ballad, it's a slow song, but it does kick off and you have this like a really solid groove going on. And when we go into the chorus, it all falls down dynamically. Even the drum groove is reduced to mostly the bass drum and some, you know, percussions. I think that's pretty unique and I really love it about this track. But I also decided that I wanted to make every chorus a bit different. And this was actually a last minute change, because I had one of the mixes where basically every chorus had every instrument. After listening to it, I just came up with this idea that we should change it a little bit. Right now, when the first chorus starts, you hear basically just my lead vocal, 16 backing vocals, the bass guitar, and a very laid back drum rhythm. In the second chorus, we add a little bit of the keyboards, which are quite subtle in the mix, but if you focus enough, I think you can find them there. And in the final chorus, we also add like 3 synthesizers, and even the drum groove changes, so it's much more up-tempo, and I think that it creates a very satisfying climax of the track. I'm not saying that if you're a writer, you should do it with every track, but I think if you do it every now and then, it can really spice up the things a little bit, and I think it makes the song more interesting, because even though the chorus remains the same in terms of the melody, different arrangements makes it worthwhile to get to every one of the choruses. When art imitates life. So now I'm going to be talking about the saxophone solo in the track Lonely Crossings. I really love that solo, and when Lucas came into my studio to record it, this was the only solo where he knew exactly what he was gonna play. 1 year before Lucas came to my studio to record that solo, we had a gig. It was the first gig with Lucas, and we played Lonely Crossings as the new track at that point. This was in August 2020, and he came to the studio in July 21 to record Persis 2. And one of his friends recorded him playing the solo in that track, and he actually loved his improvised solo to such a degree that he decided to replicate it note by note for the final version. think it sounds really great, but there was one more really cool thing that he decided to replicate. When the second chorus ends and the midsection starts, you can hear that the saxophone plays a little bit of the melody before I start singing. When we were playing live, he thought that the solo was coming right after the second chorus. So we started sort of playing like the beginning of the solo, and I looked at him and I was like, I still have some singing to do. And he decided to keep that in the track. So before I start singing, you hear a little bit of that melody, and then the saxophone solo comes after the whole singing section. And I think it's really nice that usually it's when life imitates art, but in this case it's art imitating life, imitating how it happened in a live scenario. When I write music, I just try to record all of my ideas, because sometimes, and it happened to me more than once, that I didn't record something that I thought was really good and I couldn't replicate it because I couldn't really remember it. Sometimes I record something and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I don't even remember coming up with it. Then what we do as artists is we try to imitate life through art, essentially. We try to imitate how we came up with things.